Somewhere near St. Louis, there is a hill. You could drive right past it. Most people do. It rises out of the flat Illinois floodplain like a green wave that froze mid-motion, and if nobody told you, you would assume it had always been there. A natural thing. A wrinkle in the ground. It isn't. Every basket of earth in that hill was carried up by hand, one load at a time. Millions of loads hauled on the backs of people who lived 800 years ago in the largest city that ever stood in what is now the United States. A city most people alive today have never heard of. Its name was Cahokia. And here is the part that should stop you. Cahokia did not fall to an invading army. No plague swept through it. No volcano buried it. It simply emptied. Within a few generations, a metropolis that once held more people than London went quiet, and the people who built it walked away. Why would anyone abandon the greatest city on the continent? To understand how strange that is, you have to understand what Cahokia actually was. 1,000 years ago, on the banks of the Mississippi, something extraordinary happened. The archaeologist Timothy Pocketat calls it the Big Bang. Around the year 1050, a scattered farming population exploded almost overnight into a planned urban center. Not a village that slowly grew over centuries, a city that seems to have been imagined first and then built on purpose. At its heart stood a pyramid of earth. We call it Monk's Mound today, and it is difficult to believe until you stand beneath it. It rises 10 stories into the sky. Its base covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it was raised without wheels, without draft animals, without a single metal tool. It was built entirely from soil that human beings dug up, packed into woven baskets, and carried on foot, trip after trip, until a mountain existed where there had been flat river bottom. Think about how many people have to believe in the same idea at the same time to move a mountain by hand. Around that mound spread a true city. Grand plazas flattened smooth for ceremonies and games, neighborhoods of thatched homes lining open courtyards, more than 100 other mounds, and a ring of towering red cedar posts set in a perfect circle that tracked the sun across the year and marked the solstices with quiet precision. Researchers named it Woodhenge. At its peak, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people lived here, and in the wider region, perhaps far more. That made Cahokia larger than London at the very same moment in history. Nothing in North America would match its size again until Philadelphia, 500 years later. So do not picture simple people scraping by. Picture organization, ambition, engineering, a society that could feed thousands and read the heavens. And people came from everywhere to be part of it. When archaeologists like Thomas Emerson studied the chemistry locked inside ancient teeth, the ratios that reveal where a person grew up, they found that a striking share of Cahokia's dead had been born somewhere else. They were immigrants, drawn from distant lands the way people are always drawn to a rising city, chasing something bigger than the life they left behind. Cahokia was a melting pot before the phrase existed. They played a game here too. It was called Chunky, and it spread out from Cahokia across half the continent. A player rolled a polished stone disc across the plaza, while others hurled spears at where they guessed it would stop. Thousands gathered to watch. Does that sound familiar? A city that pulls in strangers, raises monuments to itself, and gathers by the thousands to watch a game. You may live in one, but there is a darker layer beneath the plazas. In a ridge-topped mound, now called Mound 72, the archaeologist Melvin Fowler uncovered something that changes the story. A man had been buried there, laid out on a bed of more than 20,000 shell beads arranged in the shape of a great bird. Around him lay others, and among them mass graves of young women, dozens at a time, alongside people who appear to have been killed in the very moment of burial. This was a place of enormous power, and power here could be paid for in human lives. What kind of belief makes that seem necessary? What was Cahokia so devoted to that it would raise wonders and dig mass graves in the same sacred ground? For a while, Cahokia thrived, and then, slowly, it began to unravel. Sometime after the year 1200, the people did something telling. They built a wall. A massive wooden palisade, roughly 2 miles long, went up around the central precinct, and then was torn down and rebuilt, again and again. You do not wall off the heart of your own city when everything is going well. A wall is fear made solid. The same confidence that once raised a mountain was now bracing itself against a threat. Then the environment turned on them. The people of Cahokia had bet everything on the river and the rain. Their entire world ran on corn, and corn runs on water and on predictable seasons. The geoscientist Samuel Munoz studied ancient flood deposits buried deep in the Mississippi sediment and found the signature of a catastrophic flood around the year 1200, the kind that would have drowned the city's fields. And it was not a single blow. A researcher named A.J. White took a completely different approach. He measured chemical traces in the mud of a nearby lake, molecules from human waste that act as a fingerprint for how many people were living there. His data traced Cahokia's population like a heartbeat on a monitor. A rise, a peak, and then a long, steady decline that lined up with drought and flooding, one stress stacked upon the next. Now picture it from the inside. You are a farmer here, raised on the certainty that this city was the center of the world. Then the floods come. Then the rains fail. The harvests shrink year after year. The leaders who once promised that the sun would keep its schedule can no longer deliver, and the wall around the sacred heart of the city keeps getting taller. For a long time, the easy explanation was that Cahokia destroyed itself, that its people cut down too many trees, triggered erosion and runaway floods, and drowned their own farmland through sheer carelessness. It is a tidy story, and an almost comforting one, because it turns collapse into a lesson. But the archaeologist Caitlin Rankin decided to actually test it. She dug into the soil around the mounds, looking for the erosion that theory demands. She did not find it. The ground beneath the great earthworks was stable. The self-destruction story, it turns out, may say more about our own anxieties than about theirs. So if they did not simply ruin their own land, what actually drove them out? Here is where the story becomes genuinely unsettling, because the honest answer seems to be that there was no single thing. No final battle, no last plague, no one catastrophe you can point to and say, there, that is the moment it ended. Instead, there was pressure, climate stress, political strain, perhaps a slow loss of faith in leaders who could no longer explain why the world kept breaking its promises, and one by one, families made a quiet, rational choice. They left, not in a single panic, but in a slow trickle, across decades, until by around the year 1350, a century before Columbus ever set sail, the greatest city in North America stood essentially empty. Grass grew over the plazas. The Great Mound sat silent beneath the open sky. And when European explorers finally stumbled onto the earthworks generations later, they could not imagine who had raised them. Now hold on to the strangest part of all. The people of Cahokia did not vanish. That word is a trick your mind plays on you. Human beings do not evaporate. What vanished was the city itself. The idea of Cahokia, the shared belief that had bound thousands of strangers together in one place. The people scattered. They joined others, formed new nations, and carried their stories outward across the land. Their descendants are alive right now, among peoples like the Osage and many others. The bodies survived. What died was the agreement. Isn't that a stranger kind of ending than any plague? A civilization can lose not one single life and still cease to exist the moment enough people stop believing in it. And that should feel uncomfortably familiar. Because a city is never really its buildings, neither is a nation. What holds any large group of human beings together is invisible. A shared story, a mutual trust that tomorrow will resemble today. A quiet faith that the people in charge can keep the sun on schedule. Cahokia had all of that. It raised a mountain out of it. And when the weather stopped cooperating and the promises stopped holding, that invisible thing dissolved, and everything solid it had built was simply left behind in the grass. You live inside invisible things exactly like that. Your money is worth something only because everyone around you agrees that it is. Your city keeps functioning only because millions of strangers wake up each morning and keep believing in the same rules. It feels permanent. Cahokia felt permanent too, to the people who carried those baskets up the mound. They thought they were building forever. They had no idea they were the last generation who would ever call it home. So the next time you are near St. Louis and you catch sight of that green hill rising out of the floodplain, slow down. Because it was never just a hill. It is the last standing piece of a forgotten city and a monument to a single unbearable truth. A whole world can disappear while every last person inside it survives. And the largest thing human beings ever built together was never the mountain of earth. It was the story we agreed to believe.